the wind will create the scenarios for you to catch fish. That whole bank right there, and maybe that whole bay, should be pretty calm. Anytime you can find surface activity like that, you're generally in a good fishing area.
Welcome back to the Ozark podcast. We've got Dan Roberts of Beaver Lake Fly Fishing now. Which
right?
Before, I mean, lots changed since we had you on. We were just
yes,
looking back. It was March of 2023.
Yeah.
And at that time, you weren't even guiding.
I wasn't even really considering it at the time.
Yeah.
I had actually, at that point, I had just, I was 2 months into my new boat that I have, which is now, a couple years old, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea was sort of there, but it wasn't anywhere close to what it is now, obviously.
Yeah, man. You've built a brand too. You've got hats and shirts.
Well, that's it, man. Yeah.
You're doing the thing, man.
You always got to be marketing.
I love it, dude. I love it. So if y'all remember Dan, we had him on last year and he was talking specifically targeting stripers on the fly rod, and kind of came on as so Dan's a rep too in the industry, the fly fishing industry, but really was just here's the guy who kind of knows how to do this.
Yeah.
No one really
Sorta.
is.
I'm the guy who's doing it.
You're doing it.
I don't want to say that I know how to do it, but I am the guy who's doing it.
You're doing it. There's not really a whole lot of people, or I don't know of really any guides specifically who that's what they really hone in on.
Yeah,
or
right.
really make that their craft.
Yep.
And so it was all right.
Definitely on Beaver, for sure. There's lots of lakes out there in the country that,
Sure.
There's fly fishing guide specific for stripers.
Yeah.
But as far as Beaver,
Yeah.
I'm kind of the lone wolf.
And
out
in
there.
the Ozarks, right? Are there any up in Missouri that I just don't
So
that I don't know about or I'm not mentioning?
Yeah, so there's Michael Schrader. He's doing some guiding on Lake Norfolk. I don't know if he's also doing it on Bull Shoals or not, but it's gonna kill me for this one. I can't remember the name of his guide service. I want to call it Flywater Guide Service. I don't think that's right though. I'll look it up.
Michael Schrader, that's the name though.
Yeah,
if you're wondering.
Yep.
Okay, got it. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of your kind of people out there.
Yeah, it's a lot of self-hate involved in it. So nobody wants to do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have you back on. I'm glad to talk fishing with you again. It's always fun to have you on. We're gonna talk lake fly fishing. And so like I said, and we were talking before we jumped on the mics, you are now guiding on Beaver Lake. You've got Beaver Lake Fly Fishing. You want to just kind of give a brief intro to what you're doing and kind of what the point of it is, what you're really focusing on?
Yeah. So Beaver Lake Fly Fishing, I tried to pick the most generic name possible.
Yeah.
So that the Google reviews or the Google searches.
The SEO put you right to the front.
But I still haven't figured that out yet because the unfortunate part, if you were to Google Beaver Lake Fly Fishing right now, I'm nowhere on it. I don't even exist.
What?
Oh yeah. So I don't know. I'm something I'm doing is wrong. Obviously.
Hopefully this will help because some of our stuff pops up on Google. Yeah. So the more hits you have on SEO, you'll get more SEO credibility.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
Maybe this will help.
God, I hope
it
so.
might not.
It's literally if you just go to a random computer and type it in, I'm not even in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that works.
Okay.
But so I created the guide business. It's kind of been I don't know, I guess you could call it a long time coming, but I've been fly fishing on the lake for various fish, stripers, bass, whatever, for just over 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I've really wanted to offer to the community of Northwest Arkansas, because mainly out of necessity. It's not truly offered like we were talking about before by any other guide service necessarily, from the point where I have all the gear and I can at least educate you on why we're doing what we're doing while we're doing it. If we may not have the most successful day out there, but I can at least educate you on what's going on, specifically from a fly fishing perspective. for sure.
Right.
And like I was telling you before, still offer like spinning rod light tackle stuff as well. There's plenty of good guides on the lake that can probably, educate you more on the light tackle side. Um, but from a fly fishing perspective, that's what I wanted to do is offer that to the community because I was getting asked so often, like, well, like, do you guide or
Yeah.
does anybody guide? Like, I want to take a fly fishing trip. So it was really like, in my opinion, it was born more out of a necessity than anything
Right.
else.
That makes
Yeah.
sense because it really is. I feel like you kind of sit at this right in the middle of this opportunity to where there's a lot of people who they see fly
Yeah.
fishing, it's, on a YouTube video or it's in some magazine or at Bass Pro or whatever, and they're like, that looks cool,
Right.
but I have no idea how to start. I grew up lake fishing in the
Yeah.
bass boat with my dad, and like I don't really know how to merge these two worlds.
Right.
And like you sit right there in the middle. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you can take some of that bass fishing, and if you've already got a boat, like
Absolutely.
put some of this to use.
Yeah.
Go out with you and figure out how to do that.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. That's the nice thing about me is I can't say that I'm like I am well versed on both sides, both the conventional and fly fishing side. I'm by no means like the expert
Hmm.
on either side of it necessarily, but I can tell you how the two like live together, I guess, in harmony.
Yeah.
Like in a lake setting. You know what I mean? So like I can give you the skills from either end of it to at least be successful
Hmm.
in that application.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And no, and I think you're right. Like I think there's definitely that necessity out there, and
Yeah.
people are like looking for ways to fill that void, I guess.
It's breaking the barrier too. You have everybody sees the hard barrier between your tournament bass angler who calls it the fairy wand
Hmm.
versus your
The hippie
like
stick.
you're like dry fly freaking Tom or whoever who like all they want to do is fly fish and they've got their vest on and they just think the the bass boat is like the scourge of the waterway,
Yeah.
right? So it's merging those two worlds. I think that's the most important aspect of any of that for me.
Yeah.
It's like your central fly fishing guy who wants to go do it on the lake, like yeah, incorporate a spinning rod into that when conditions aren't favorable
Hmm.
from a wind perspective. But then in the same tune, like your normal guy out there throwing bass gear, like incorporate a fly rod
Yeah.
once in a while.
Yeah.
Like the two can live out there.
Right. They don't have to be enemies of one another.
Exactly.
I really like when people don't stick in one box or don't put themselves in a box. I feel like you become a little bit more adaptable to different situations, like you're talking about. But I also get to like the purist side of things of like, especially guys who like I bow hunt, I fly fish. Like this is what I do. I do it because I enjoy it so much, so I'm only going to do that. I get that too, but I definitely think like there's obviously scenarios where one is going to be better suited to another.
Oh yeah.
So I want to start with just in general, kind of thinking about the outline for this. To dive into some of this, maybe set the stage on like just lakes in general.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, if someone's listening, they're maybe either someone who's like been fly fishing a lot and they've only really done it on streams and creeks and rivers.
Yeah.
That would be more like me. Like I've kind of done that. But then also you might have some people who are like really familiar with like lake fishing, but they're like traditional tackle and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So some of what I'm going to ask you here, the lake guys, they're going to know a little bit more of, but just walk me through like for the guy who's a fly fisherman, he's coming onto a lake. Help me understand the lake and how it works and like seasonally, what's changing on the water. How do you go about like understanding what's happening underneath the surface?
Yeah.
As far as migrations, seasonal patterns, weather, like all the stuff that goes into the lake. Like how do you boil it down? And I know that's a broad question.
It is.
You could take this so many ways.
Yeah, I know. And so like man, like
I'll dial it in. I'll try to help
I was
here.
gonna say, because like to start on that from a fly fishing perspective, it's like let's say I'm gonna create this scenario. Like you've got access to a boat. You're traditionally a trout fisherman. Last weekend you went and bought a sinking line because you heard like that's what you need to go catch bass on the lake, right? it's May, you're gonna have low wind and high sunshine, but you want to go try to find this like mysterious top water bite that people are talking about for stripers or bass or whatever. So like you get out there early, you're fresh in it. You're
Hmm.
like, I have no idea what to do. Um, it you can go a lot of different directions with this
Yeah.
essentially, but just to start out, the more water you can cover throughout your time in that body of water, the more you're gonna like educate yourself in the long run. Like I can't tell you how important it is like when you're at least beginning. If you've only got one day, I understand that. But if you're wanting to go out and learn it,
Hmm.
cover lots of water. If you don't have a graph on your boat, things are gonna like just be hard
Yeah.
unless you are truly only chasing the top water bite. Um, but just moving around on the water a lot, looking at your surroundings, um, looking at what's going on up closer to the bank.
So
You're
let's take like right now, like someone who's listening, we're sitting here. By the time this comes out, it'll be June, but
yeah.
we're sitting here right now, end of May.
Hmm.
It'll be early June when this comes out. Like, what is happening right now on the lake that, for you, when you go out there, that you're kind of like keyed into of like,
Yeah.
this is what's happening underneath the surface right
Yeah.
now?
So we are essentially like towards the middle to end again, depending on what part of the lake you're on, because that's another huge portion.
Okay.
Like if you're talking specifically about Beaver, you could go to the southernmost end, which is actually like the headwaters of the lake,
Right.
up around Goshen,
Mm-hmm.
which is weird because our lake runs south to north.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is, your water temps up there. I hadn't been up there in a few weeks, but it's like you're probably sitting, say, like 80-ish, 85 degrees somewhere up in that section, like maybe a little cooler. Or you can go all the way up to the dam, to the north end, which is like technically the end of the lake.
Yeah.
The differences between the two, like up around the top end, you could have a foot of visibility, maybe a foot and a half, because the water's just typically a little muddier. You go up to the dam, you have 25 feet of visibility.
Mm.
So when it comes to a lake like that, you just have so many different variables.
Yeah, a lot of variation there.
Um,
Is that consistent too? Like if you were to go over to like Bull Shoals and like fish on North Fork, generally like the headwaters of the lake is going to be a little bit more muddy because
yeah,
that
typically,
sediment is washing in.
yeah, and people will probably correct me if I'm wrong on that because I'm not super well versed on those lakes specifically,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, I would tell you like the more of where the water is coming in is typically going to be your skinnier like river section, if
Yeah.
you want to call it that, a little bit dirtier. Whereas the rest of the lake, you get into the deeper, like as you get closer and closer to the dam,
Yeah.
you're going to get your deeper, clearer water.
Naturally, that makes sense.
Yeah, and your different types of fish as well, like different sizes of fish, different types of fish. It's like based on the seasons. It's a lot that goes into that. But
Okay.
for right now, essentially what's going on, our water temps, again, depending on where you are on the lake, we're anywhere from 70 to probably 80-ish or 80 something.
Okay.
We are really nearing the end of our shad spawn, like where I've been fishing, like in the mid lake area. So every spring, the shad will, which is the forage fish that pretty much every predatory fish in the lake eats, the
That's
threadfin shad.
That's the food.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the banquet.
Okay.
Springtime is the threadfin and the gizzard shad as well. But they'll move up into any type of like bank structure, like brush, buckbrush is like really what they like to spawn in. But any kind of cover grass, they'll move up into that stuff along the bank, and they'll spawn up in there. So the way you can find a shad spawn is again like you drive around and you just simply like scan along the bank with your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a lot of like what looks like shimmering going
Mm-hmm.
on top of the surface, that's typically a shad spawn going on.
Okay. Gotcha.
Anytime you can find surface activity like that, you're generally in a good fishing area.
Okay.
I guess in a broad sense.
And when you say a good fishing area, like, are you specifically talking about fly fishing? Like you're
Anything.
like, okay,
Yeah. So anything
Anything.
at all, because those fish are going to be keyed in on the shad spawn from a noise perspective. It makes a very specific noise when you have that many shad congregated together to those fish. They can feel it in their lateral lines. They, for lack of a better term, can hear it.
Yeah.
Essentially, like that noise that those shad will emit. So those predatory fish will key in on that, and that's when those fish will either get in the upper column of the water, like for your quote unquote top water bite,
Mm-hmm.
or they'll get up close to the bank and just be in shallower water and shallow enough for your typical normal fly fisherman to not have to, be fishing 25, 30 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
So from a conventional standpoint, you could be throwing a topwater lure or whatever. From a fly fishing perspective, you could be throwing a popper or something that just sits like subsurface with an intermediate line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of like as far as what's going on in the lake right now, we're nearing the end or we're at the end of the shad spawn. Um, Depending on what's going to happen with this cicada thing, and again, depending on what lake you're on right now, the carp at this point are pretty much done spawning for the most part. Um, they're going to be post spawn. They're going to be getting hungry here quickly, and they're going to be looking up to eat cicadas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You
So
think they'll like key in exclusively on cicadas?
not necessarily. It's hard to say, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Totally dependent on the area that you're in.
Sure.
Because it's a 13 and a 17-year brood. From what I've understand, is you need land that's been relatively undisturbed
Right.
for that amount of time.
Yeah.
So you'd have to have the correct environment for the bugs to be in the water.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, the fish could definitely like really only key in on that stuff. Carp will always mud and find crayfish and things like that in the bottom, but they're for sure it's a noise thing.
Yeah.
Again, like they're gonna hear that and see that up top.
Oh, they're looking up for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to being on the lake, how keyed in on lake levels and recent weather events are you as any given day that you're going out there?
Yeah, I would tell you like rain is a big one for sure, and how many days you're going to be on a certain part of the lake after rains.
Okay.
Because again, if you're towards the south end where it's traditionally a little more murky water in general anyway, if you
Mhm.
get a big rain, that will suddenly become much more muddy because it's got more mud banks and you've got more creek arms and stuff that are flowing in down there that just like incorporate a mud bank
Yeah.
more than if you were to move up the lake and you have more like limestone and things like that, just more rock features where it'll kind of murky up, but it won't necessarily muddy.
Right.
And then because again, the lake runs south to north, you'll get essentially this massive line of muddy water start to move up throughout the lake. Everybody calls it the mud line
Yeah.
because it's literally what it is. You can find a physical line in the lake after, let's say, you get a 3-inch rain, like a couple days in a row. Give it a few days, and a like hard physical mud line with muddy water and then clear water next to it will just continuously be moving up the lake.
It'll just push up.
Yeah,
Wow.
until it hits about the 112 bridge around the Prairie Creek area. That's really one of the first places that it widely opens up.
Mm.
That's in my opinion on the lake one of the like first widest parts.
Yeah.
That 112 bridge, when people talk about the river section versus the lake section, that's typically where the divide happens.
Okay.
At least
Gotcha.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
So does that change then how you're gonna fish?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It can change your flies. Like if you're wanting to target bass more in the muddy water, which can always be a good idea. If you're targeting larger fish for sure, you may throw something with more flash on it or that gets down a little bit faster with some heavier lead eyes or just something that's a little bit bulkier in
Mhm.
general. You need to really, I guess, elicit that bite based more on a lateral line, like the actual feeling from the fish of your lure moving more than the fish's sight, seeing that fly
Right.
moving.
Because the visibility's down.
Right.
They're
So you're
gonna need to
moving
feel it.
away from like them eating the little fry to where like they're not going to have as many readily available meals.
Mhm.
So you throw something big at them and those big fish are going to be hungry
Yeah.
because again, they haven't been able to eat as much.
Yeah.
So you take a gamble with it, but it can pay off too if you run that route. The other route you can run is like just continuously fishing the clear water,
Mhm.
which this time of the year is more centered around, again, the shad, like larger schools of shad, that those fish are keyed in on. So you're trying to really like match the hatch this time of the year. That being said, one of the fun parts about this time of the year is you have the big shad that are spawning,
Mm-hmm.
but then the small, like little fingerlings that are in the bushes as well. So there's kind of a broad range of sizes that you can be using in these lures. Um, that it it makes it a lot of fun in the
Yeah.
springtime because you can throw like a little size 10 clouser, or you could throw, a one aught.
Pop shad.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Did you
Yeah,
guys know that Dan Roberts has his own
here we
fly?
go.
What is it, one or two?
Well, so technically, I've got two of them.
You got two
Technically,
flies.
I've got three of them now.
Oh, really?
Well,
Hey,
sort of.
congrats, man.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
big.
so it's the Good Friday, which is the lead eye version. It's like it's a clouser with more flash incorporated as the body. It's not like a true bucktail clouser.
Okay.
That's a great one for the white bass run. Or like this time of the year when the shad are spawning, and you need to get like either below shad schools really quickly, or just match a really small fingerling.
Mm.
The other one is the Pop Shad, and technically the Pop Shad HD.
Okay.
The HD is just the newer one. It's on a beefier hook, and it's got some different flash incorporated into it as well.
It's
But
like
yeah,
the new and improved version.
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
That's cool. I didn't know if people knew that. We
yeah,
talked about it on their last episode,
yeah.
but it's
Right,
been a while.
right.
So you're throwing, so you can kind of play in the springtime. You can play some different sizes, play with some different flies, and still have success. You don't have to really be like, only on this day you need to throw this size.
No, that's exactly right.
This
Like
color,
it's
okay.
spring is really fun. It's a fun time to get into the late game because there's such a broad spectrum of what you can do. Like, so on any given day in the wintertime when I'm chasing stripers or bass or whatever, I'll have like two fly rods on the deck, and it's typically like an 8 and a 9 or both nines with pretty much the same sinking line on
Mm-hmm.
there. Like I might have a medium to fast sinking and then a fast sinking, or like an intermediate and a fast sinking. But man, in the springtime, like I'll have four typically for myself. I'll have a floating and intermediate tip, um, like a medium sink rate fly line, and then a fast sink rate.
Okay.
So it's like you fish all these different types of the water column that you want to. Like, if you've got schools of shad that you're seeing on your sonar unit that are hovering in the 15 to 20 foot range, and you can see stripers under them or bass under them. You can set yourself up to where you can fish that 20 to 30 foot deep
Mm-hmm.
range with a
Yeah.
fast sinking, or in the same area, if you see those fish busting up on the shore, you can just run up there real quick with a floating line and throw a popper.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool
That is
time of the
cool.
year for sure.
And you gotta, I mean, in those scenarios, like things can change pretty quick. I
Yeah.
would think, like you could see this
Yeah.
ball kind of be busted up and
Mhm.
and get up to it and like it kind of die off or
Absolutely.
move.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
had
you got to go
this.
quick.
Yeah, it's a very quick game for sure. It's like we call it, or some people call it, like running and gunning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally what it is. So I had it last week. I got on, basically this pod of hybrids and stripers. There were probably, I don't know, there were 50 fish in it probably,
Oh wow.
but they would come up.
That's
They
a
would,
big. Is that a big pod? Or is that like a
um,
normal size?
it's like, that's a medium sized pod, I
Okay.
would tell you. Like a big pod is like you get an acre of fish coming
No
up. Oh yeah,
way.
which we don't get a lot of
Okay.
on beaver anymore. To be honest with you, like things have changed over the last 10 years or so, and I hate being that guy, but I would tell you fishing used to be a lot easier
Yeah.
on beaver, specifically the like fly fishing for stripers. In my opinion, used to be a lot easier than it is now. Um, there's several factors to that we don't have to get into, but um as far as like the quickness of the fish when they're feeding in that style, I'd have this group of fish come up. They'd feed for 30, 45 seconds, and they go right back down. And you could cast in there and hopefully hook one, probably not, because they're all moving in unison so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they're chasing those shad. They either eat all the shad because let's say there were only 100 shad in the group. They just munch them all right then.
Yeah.
And they're moving I would see these fish move 100 yards in under a minute. I mean, they'd move that far and you'd
Wow.
see them come back up again. You'd see them up on the surface 30, 45 seconds. They go right back down. It's like move back out and they'd move closer to you. And it's literally like, it's this mind game of, okay, am I going to chase these things with the trolling motor, like on high,
Yeah.
basically, like just around everywhere and try to catch up with them? Or am I just going to try to put myself in like a central location and just like basically like a clock, just keep casting all the way around the boat?
Hmm.
It's like make a 100-foot cast that way, like strip it all the way in, like move it, 15 feet to the left. And like, okay, now I'm casting that way. And just continuously try to do that, you know? And that's really what it that's what it boils down to for some of those groups
Yeah.
of fish.
Wow.
It's just like you're fan casting to ghosts and you just hope you make contact with one.
Dang.
Yeah.
So you just basically in that scenario, you're trying to put yourself in the right general area.
Yep.
Knowing that
Yeah.
there are fish around. I'm seeing
Yes.
action. I'm seeing movement. I've seen them on my sonar unit. I maybe don't know exactly where they are right now, but eventually, like, I know I'm in a good spot.
Yeah.
It's kind of like deer hunting a little bit.
For sure.
It's like
you're hoping that the deer just walks by.
Yeah.
That's
it's
same
like
situation.
I put myself in the best place that I know to be because there's sign, there's
Yeah.
stuff going on, and now I just have to things just have to line up and happen.
Yep. And I'm really like trying to pinpoint this from the perspective of the guy again, like who may not have the sonar unit, who's
Mhm.
chasing this mid to late spring topwater bite.
Yeah.
That's kind of sporadic.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like you want to put yourself in the position where you think, you think about it from a hunting perspective too. You want to try to pin in whatever you're chasing, like whether it's a deer, you want to try to get them into an area where you know that if they've gone in, they have to come back out,
Okay.
like past you,
Yeah.
essentially.
Okay.
So if you can get these fish, like if you can do some research ahead of time, like just looking at the topography of where you're going to be fishing on the map, something like that. But if you can find like, where you'll have like almost like a bowl,
Mhm.
basically, where you have the bank like backing you.
Yeah.
You know that there's a group of shad inside of this bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have almost like an embankment on the other side, just some shallower water that comes up. You know that at some point that bait is going to be attacked.
Yeah.
So like it's almost a waiting game. Like everybody always talks about patience and fly fishing.
Yeah.
There is like no exception to that in this scenario.
So it's like you're kind of in that scenario. It's like you're looking for a funnel in some regard of like letting the topography like force the issue, and you
Right.
put yourself right there.
Yeah.
Towards like they're gonna have to come by
Yeah.
me at some point,
Right.
and that's when I'm gonna smoke them.
That and like that's always the goal. It doesn't always work out.
Yeah, sure.
Like there's really two ways to do it. It's that way. It's you wait and you hope, and sometimes that doesn't pan out, or you try to consistently keep up with the fish,
Mm-hmm.
which will just drive you crazy.
Yeah.
But both sides of it will truly drive you crazy because you'll see the fish come up 100 yards away, and you're like, well, like I could probably get over there.
Yeah.
And ideally, you get the pot of fish that comes up and stays up for a while.
Yeah.
And isn't shy about your boat being around there or whatever. But that's another big thing. I mean, they are spatially extremely aware of all of their surroundings when they're feeding like that. They're hyper aware because of all the other fishermen on the lake this time of the year. The fish tend to be a little more agreeable in the wintertime just because there aren't quite as many people fishing for them out there. But in the springtime, people will chase these pods of topwater like fish.
Yeah.
And so, if you shut down your motor too close to them, it'll just put them right back down.
Oh, okay.
And then they'll move, 100, 200 yards away and start feeding again where they feel safe. Because there are that many shad around.
Wow.
Like, they have their choice.
Dang.
So it's again, from a hunting perspective, it's a sneaky thing.
It is a sneaky thing.
Yeah.
You really got to be careful of like you want to be close but not too close.
Exactly.
And you got to be quick but not too quick. And
Right.
Is it ever the scenario you're talking about like a pod? And to preface this, you're mostly talking about striper, right?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Stripers and hybrids. Bass, very bass are far more agreeable when it
Okay.
comes to a topwater bite. Like they'll come up and chase an individual shad or something like
Yeah.
that, and they will continue to get the shad until they eat it.
Yeah.
You can get. It's been my experience that you can get much closer to bass,
Right.
and they'll hang around a
Okay.
lot more often.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
And bass, they don't move in pods like
they
that,
don't
do
move
they?
as fast either. That's a really important note to make. So like your bass will they're more of like the wait and strike type predator. Like they'll sit in a pod
It's
in
an
a specific
ambush.
yeah, they'll sit around, structure or cover and they'll wait for that group of shad to come over them. They'll come up and whack them.
Hmm.
So it's easier for you to hone in on that cuz they're not going to be moving a whole lot
Yeah.
necessarily. Whereas the stripers, them being an anadromous fish, like they're moving constantly. They
Mm.
never stop moving. Like
Oh man.
stripers do not stop.
Yeah.
Even when they're not eating or you can't feed them, they're still moving in, schools of 50 to 200 fish.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like
What a cool fish.
it's a very cool fish. It's a really frustrating fish, but it's awesome.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But then when you finally pull it off, like the reward
You
is
hook
that
one
much
and you're
greater.
just like, yeah,
I've
exactly.
done it.
Right.
Oh man, that's cool.
Yeah.
So when it comes to bass, they're a little bit more of an ambush predator. They're not moving quite as much like that.
Right.
What I was going to ask with the pods, are there scenarios where you don't have to move as quick, and it's like they are going to stay up on the surface for a little bit longer, and
Yeah.
you've got some time to kind of like meander your way there
Right.
stealthily and
Yeah.
make it happen.
So what I can tell you is there are quite a few different factors that can go into like how long those fish will feed, and like it really depends on how happy they are with like weather conditions or barometric pressure conditions, things like that. From a weather perspective, the best thing you can have is like an almost rainy, cloudy, like not truly raining, but if you can get it like 100% cloud cover, very low wind, or like, a 5 mile an hour wind at the most,
Hmm.
that's when those fish, well, specifically the shad, will stay higher in the water column throughout longer periods of the day.
Okay.
So, like the morning topwater bite is typically, if it's going to be a sunny day, it'll last the first hour or maybe two in the morning, this time of the year for sure. Because once that sun comes up, it'll pretty much shut all the shad down. It'll bring them farther down in the water column. I don't
Is that
know.
because of visibility? Like they're more cautious about like, because when you have like a high noon sun,
Mhm.
especially in a creek, like you can see everything.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking like birds and stuff like that. Are they pushed down because they're just trying to stay away from
Yeah,
predators?
I think that's got to be part of it for sure. The funny thing is, the shad are eating on like the little plankton, the phytoplankton,
Yeah.
that are obviously like coming off of the photosynthesis process or
Hmm.
whatever from just the sunlight, I guess.
Yeah.
So you'd think that they would want to stay higher up in the water
Yeah.
column on a
And
sunny part of the day.
warmer water, you'd
Right.
think.
Um, but I can just tell you from experience, like once the sun comes up, generally the shad will start to go deeper in the water column.
Okay.
And if nothing else, even if the shad stay up higher, the maybe not the bass as much, but the stripers will absolutely start to go deeper. The stripers and just all temperate bass for the most part, very very temperamental when it comes to how much light is
Mm.
coming through the water. So again, you talk about like going down in the river section, if you get muddier water, even if it's sunny, they may stay up in the water column a
Mm.
little bit higher
Yeah.
throughout the day. But if you're up around like the dam area where you've got 25 feet of visibility, those fish are either going to completely stop eating because of that light pressure, or they're just going to like move much deeper.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this is the time of the year that you get that bright sunlight and you get the hot water that also pushes them deeper because they like a cooler water scenario.
Hmm.
Um, and you're catching them, over 140 feet of water. You may be catching them 40 feet deep, but they're over 140, 200 feet of water.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So as far as weather conditions go, if I could tell you one thing, like you want cloudy and you want calm, and like in early morning scenarios, typically better.
Yeah. That makes
Early
sense.
morning, later evening,
Okay.
things like that.
That makes sense. And that's probably like when you're going to see the least amount of boat traffic too,
Absolutely, yeah,
especially on a lake where people are tubing and they're
yeah,
wakeboarding and surfing and all
yeah.
kinds of stuff.
And depending on your moon phase, like those are typically the higher feeding portions of the day as well. You know,
Mhm.
like first part of the morning when they have a little bit of light, um, where they can see those shad better, and then later in the evening, um, like not as they're going to sleep, but as like the sun has come down off the trees now, and you have that low light, so it's a better ambush point for them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So,
This is all speculation too. I'm sure
sure.
I know people are going to listen to this and they're like, well, that's wrong. Everything is open to speculation on all this stuff. This has just been like my experiences over the last 10 years on this lake,
Yeah.
like trying to learn what these fish are out here doing.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, everyone's got their own philosophy and approach to certain things. And
Yeah.
sure, there are like facts and there are things that are like, this is true and this is why
Absolutely.
this happens.
Yeah.
But even that leaves room for interpretation of like, well, how do you play that to your advantage
Hmm.
if that does happen or
Yeah.
if that is the truth? How do you play that? That's what I love about talking to different people who fish is like everyone can have a different approach to it
Yeah.
and be like, I don't like that way, so I don't do it. And so I
Right.
do it this way.
Yeah.
And so to talk to someone like you who's like, I can't tell you this is all fact, but it's like
It's just the way I do it.
this is the way
Yeah.
I've done it and this is how
And
it's worked.
it's been successful.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not always successful, but it has been successful. And nothing can the main thing is that nothing can be replaced with time on the water.
Yeah.
You know, it's like time in the woods or anything like that. You know,
Mhm.
like you're not gonna learn. You will learn from a certain degree by like sitting behind a computer and watching videos, you know, watching tutorials, things like that.
Listening to a podcast.
Yeah, listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
Listening to the Ozark podcast. But
It doesn't
you
replace
gotta go out there
Yeah.
and do it. Like you're gonna have a lot of days where you don't catch a whole lot of anything, but if you want to learn it, you just gotta stick with it.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
There's no like secret code because every single day is different.
Yeah.
You know?
As soon as you give the secret code, it's like it doesn't work. And
Exactly.
People are like,
That's
what the heck?
literally it. I mean, like I can't tell you how many days I've had where I'll go one morning and, you know, I'll catch 5 or 10 like big fish of different types, and then I'll call my buddy and it's like, hey, let's go tomorrow. We go out there. It's like almost exactly the same conditions, like similar areas,
Mhm.
and the fish are just gone.
Just not
You know,
there.
it's just like I don't know.
Uh,
Like I couldn't tell you. You
I'm
know,
not
they're
sure.
just gone.
Yeah. If you could pick like ideal conditions.
Hmm.
So let's say you're someone who's listening right now and you're like, all right, well, if I'm gonna go try this, like I want to go on the ideal day. Like I'm gonna pick my day and go try this.
I'm gonna look at the Weather Channel and I'm gonna tell you like how to look at this.
Okay.
But continue your
Yeah.
question.
Well, that's a great. I would. Yeah, you should definitely do that.
Yeah.
And then from there, expand into like on that day, what are you rigged up for? How are you going to fish that? So that someone could go out there and be like, okay, I've picked my day.
Yeah.
My weather conditions are ideal per Dan Roberts.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to attack this striper,
Mm-hmm.
or we could probably do both. Let's do probably striper because that's just cool. And like,
Yeah.
if you're going to do this,
If you're gonna chase that one fish, like you got to stick with that one fish.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can come back to like bass or something
Yeah,
like that.
for sure. So with the Weather Channel, like I'm looking at the days.
Are you a
through the
Weather
week.
Channel guy?
I like the Weather Channel. The Windy app is incredible for an hour by hour wind.
Okay.
I really like the
The
Windy app.
Windy app. I've got Weatherbug too, but
Weather, I think they're good. I just haven't ever used it.
Okay.
The Windy app is good for an hour by hour. The other thing that the Windy app will show you is a wind map, which is very key on the lake.
Oh, okay.
So we talk about like you're wanting a cloudy, calm scenario. You may have a really cloudy day, right? But you may have a 9 mile an hour wind.
Mm-hmm.
So with like that wind map on the Windy
Yeah.
app, it'll show you like, okay, this is where the wind is coming from. If you know there's going to be a high bank where that wind is coming from, you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure that whole bank right there and maybe that whole bay should be pretty calm because
okay.
of the wind backing up
wind's
against it.
Going over the
Right.
top of it. Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
So even if you don't have ideal conditions, just blanket statement,
Yeah.
like you can still maybe
you can
find
still
some
go out there.
spots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Like, and that again, like cover water.
yeah.
Like if you don't find exactly what you're looking for, like just keep covering water. Like look around until you find what you're looking for.
And then, like, so are you looking for a visual cue? Like, I'm not fishing here unless I see X, Y, and Z. Or will you go ahead and fish it because you're like, wind's calm, I've got cloud cover here. I'm just gonna go ahead and check out the spot while I'm here.
That's hard for me because like that's almost based on experience in the certain places at
Okay.
this point. Um, but a lot of it's based on structure too. You know, you may again because these fish move so much, like the structure can vary.
Mm-hmm.
From a striper perspective, they'll be on a deep rock bank, but they'll also be on a shallow mud flat, like depending on what time of year you're in.
Okay.
Um, so really, like what I could tell you is like find your calm areas in the morning, sit there, like fish it for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want to find some structure on the bank where you've either got like some wind coming through a pocket, like where you could see bait has potentially been blown through. That would be like a good ambush point for fish to be, you know, feeding on that bait. Or again, like if you can find, you know, when you're looking at your bank, if it looks like almost a bowl scenario where
Mm-hmm.
like those fish, okay, they could pin in bait right here, right? That would
Yeah.
make sense. Just try things like that. But again, um, you know, it doesn't necessarily just have to be about the bank. As you're moving back into a creek arm, you know, a creek arm is always a good spot to go to in like any time of the spring for the most part, except for like now it's starting to get a little late for it,
Mm-hmm.
especially early in the spring when those fish are moving back to spawn or just like chasing shad way back up into creek arms.
Yeah.
You try your initial points like all the way out on the channel, and then you just continue to move in and fish secondary points like
Okay.
farther and farther back in
Yeah.
until eventually like you either find fish or you don't, and that's kind of the ball game.
You've kind of like covered that ground. And you're
Right.
like, all right, we've cleared the building. Like we can
Exactly.
go.
Yeah.
Okay. Got
And you're
it.
going to find out pretty quick too, like if there's bait in an area, you know, like you get hung, you go up to the shore and you start to see balls of shad.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to give you a cue like, okay, there's bait here. Like there's probably some fish around here
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But just like being in an area with a stealthy approach, you know, eventually, you know, within several minutes, like you're either gonna hear some top water activity or you're just gonna like see some surface tension, you know, because that's another big deal with the calm conditions. When those shad are up in the water column, you'll actually see like almost like a flickering tension on the water.
Mm.
It looks like a wind that has gone across like a flat water essentially, but it's only in one small area. And that's basically a group of shad. So
Okay.
if you ever see that, like you see a bunch of calm water and then you see this like this tension up on top of the water, it's not like, you know, gushing up or anything like that, but it's just not quite like the rest of it. That's typically balls of shad.
Okay.
It's
Got it.
also typically like nervous shad. You'll start to see the shad like kind of flicker out of the water. That's a good sign. Like that's nervous shad, or you'll
Mm.
see one shad that like branches off and is literally on top of the water, like scooting away.
Yeah.
That's signs that there are predatory fish around that are feeding on like that bait
Yeah.
in
On
the
the
area.
homies.
Exactly. That's it.
Like,
Yeah.
gotta get out of here.
Yeah. So I can just tell you, like, you start in areas that just like look good. You
Yeah.
hang around for a few minutes. If there's truly just nothing going on, like you just kind of figure it out. You know, if I'm fishing a completely new area, I don't really like to give it. And again, I'm coming from a different perspective because I've got live scope and all that stuff. So like I can scan around and see what's going on in the
That's.
water.
I was gonna ask you that, and if you got more to like break down the weather app, I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
But keep breaking down the app. Like if
Okay.
you're looking and you're like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna go out on this day. What else would you look at?
So Weather Channel. So I always go on the daily one that'll show you like basically every day. All
Okay.
right. So let's see. So I'm looking at Springdale here. So Wednesday, typically I'm looking for no more than a 5 to 10 mile an hour forecasted wind.
Okay.
That's pretty much assuring me that in the morning, your first like 3 to 4 hours is never going to be more than like 6, 7 miles an hour, which is like sort of the top end from a true flat calm perspective. You don't want to go a whole lot higher than that. Wednesday, they're calling for 50% chance of rain. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want.
Really?
Yeah, because with 50 and with them showing scattered showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon, you may not have it like the cloud cover initially, but if you want to stay out there a little longer, those storms are gonna move in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're gonna have two things on that. You're gonna have a cloudy condition like later in the day, but you're also gonna have like a small front, like weather front of some sort moving in, that's gonna move the barometric pressure around, and
Right.
you're gonna like create a window where those fish want to feed
Mm.
in the morning
Okay.
before those storms come through.
Yeah.
So like Wednesday looks like a great day.
Okay. And
From
this
that,
is when we're recording. So if you're
yeah,
listening,
right. So what
this
is
will have
this?
changed.
May 29th. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Thursday, 10 to 15. So like I see that as far as the top water bite, I'm not even messing with it.
Okay.
Friday, 10 to 15, 80% chance of rain. No, not messing with it.
And you're talking about top water there. Are you pretty much like you prefer top water? Like you're looking top water first?
If I'm doing stuff this time of the year, like that's just what I want to go do.
Okay.
You
Got
know
it.
what I mean?
Got it.
That's kind of my preferred thing.
Okay.
Saturday's gonna be an awesome day. 5 to 10 mile an hour winds out of the south. 60% chance of rain.
Okay.
That looks fantastic.
Scattered thunderstorms in the morning, cloudy skies late.
Right. So
So
like you're gonna have some spotty weather around
yeah.
again. Like you're gonna be creating that window for those fish to feed around the storm.
Yeah.
Um, and when I say the chance of rain being 60%, even if it doesn't rain, like that's a high enough chance to where you're gonna have cloud cover.
Yeah.
It may not be like right out of the gate, but it's gonna be quickly
Right.
for sure.
If it does rain, are you out of there? Like you're like, it's not happening.
If it's like gonna thunderstorm,
Yeah.
you might as well leave because
Sure.
the like all the electricity in the air like it shuts the fish down pretty hard with
Yeah.
their lateral line. But like if it's just raining, it's on
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
From a top water perspective, it's difficult because you're breaking up the surface tension,
Mm-hmm.
but all that's really doing is giving you more cover from the fish that you're chasing.
Yeah.
So like it's just giving you again like a higher advantage to hide from the fish.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it can, some of my biggest fish that I've ever caught have been in the rain
Yeah.
for sure.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's just like epic too. Like
Oh, it's incredible.
pulling a big fish
Yeah.
in the rain. You're
Yep.
like, I'm doing it.
Yeah,
man.
it's
I'm
the
out here."
best.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So that's how I break that stuff down. I'm looking for somewhere between a 0 and 10 mile an hour wind for the most part in the morning. Cloudy, calm conditions from a topwater perspective, and just from like a kind of an all day perspective too. I prefer a cloudy day. Like you can throw some wind in there, not a ton.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to have my like ideal conditions like throughout a whole day, it would start with basically no wind in the morning with clouds, moving into again like a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind like throughout the day
Yeah.
because it allows me to not just chase the top water throughout the whole day, but it like you can fish some wind blown points and you can go fish some banks that have like wind blowing into it that's pushing bait, again corralling bait into certain areas. Like the wind will create scenarios
Mm-hmm.
for you to have success.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid to fish in the wind. It's difficult to fish in the wind.
Yeah.
There's
Especially you're talking about like 80+ foot casts.
absolutely. Yeah. Or like 60 to 80, whatever. Like that's difficult in the wind
Yeah.
for sure. But the wind will create the scenarios for you to catch fish
Mhm.
because it pushes that bait around so much.
What about for my early grinders listening who like they're waking up and they don't have time to go in the morning
Yeah.
and they're like, dude, like it's light outside till like 8:30,
It's
almost
wild.
9 o'clock
Yeah,
right now.
right.
What about the guys who is it the same thing in the evening?
In the evening, like I'm just gonna tell you, I'm not as much of an expert on the evening bite.
Okay.
That being said, I can tell you like the best time to fish in the evening is going to be like the 30 minutes after what they call true sunset.
Okay.
That's another important thing that I didn't mention. The hours on this thing, like always be at the ramp at least 30 minutes before sunrise.
Okay.
Like this time of the year, I like to get there about 45 minutes before sunrise.
Yeah.
Because that true like top water bite is going to last from like a hair before sunrise until an hour after
Okay.
or somewhere in there. And then the same is kind of true on the opposite side, on the evening side. You know, once that sun has gone down under the trees and you now have like a good calm scenario, again, like it's not cloudy, but it's not sunny anymore either. You just have darker conditions.
Yeah.
Those fish will start to come back up and feed on the surface.
Okay.
So that like sunset to, you know, maybe even an hour after sunset when it's like truly dark, but that time frame is great as well. So
Okay.
like a lot of people that think like, well, I've only got, you know, 2 hours until the sun goes down. That's the only time you want to be out there anyway.
Yeah.
In the evening, quite
Right.
honestly.
Right.
Yeah, like I'll go bass fish up in the river section in the evenings during the summertime. I'll launch the boat at 6 and
Mhm.
fish till 9:30,
Yeah.
and then take back out again.
And
You
then
know,
head out.
you fish for 3.5 hours, whatever.
That's a lot of time to
It's a
get in
lot of
at the end
time.
of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because like again, you know, you learn a lot in that short amount of time because you're putting yourself in the best case scenario
Mhm.
to have these successful situations. So it's not like you're not out there for 8 hours in bright sunshine, like where all the mastercrafts are out and about, like running around. Like those are all scenarios where like your success rate is going to be extremely low
Yeah, it
in
goes
that
down.
time. Yeah. I don't want to call it a waste of time because like time on the water is not a waste of time.
Yeah.
But like the more you can put yourself in a successful situation, the more you're going to learn.
Yeah.
Like quicker.
Yeah,
For
that makes
sure.
sense. You've broke down kind of like your ideal day conditions that you're looking for if
Yeah.
you're going to go target stripers.
Yeah.
Now, stripers, to me, it sounds a little bit intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would maybe need to like.
It is. It's intimidating to me, and I've been doing it for
Yeah.
10 years,
So
over 10 years.
I would like need to work my way up to that
Yeah.
potentially,
Mhm.
unless I'm just like a brave soul and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I'm doing that. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna figure it out. Which there are those people out there.
Uh-huh.
But for like something like bass, like you want to go fish the lake and you're like, I just want to go out there and have a good time, like
Yeah.
catch a few fish. Maybe it's not even bass, like crappie, whatever. Like I just want to go out there and like fly fish on the lake.
Yeah.
What kind of conditions and days are you going out, and does it matter as much? Like talk me through that. If you just want to go out there and have a good time, catch fish, what would you focus on?
I would still like to have a very similar day.
Okay.
Like maybe a little extra wind added now, or like staying outside of the top water situation, I guess. Like I still like a cloudy day for the most part. From a bass perspective, as we were talking about before, they're much more structure oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So you can really start to look at the bank and say, like, okay, like that's a rock point that comes out a little farther than the rest of the bank. It's not, you know, 100 feet deep on either side. Chances are there's something, you know, crawling around or swimming around in those rocks that bass are probably eating.
Yeah.
You can break that stuff down a little bit easier, or it's like, oh, there's grass on the bank there
Mm-hmm.
and it isn't anywhere else. Like I'll go fish that grass.
Yeah.
Like bass like being in cover.
Okay.
Like fish in general do. But where stripers will just like go sit out in 140 feet of water and swim around all day
Yeah.
and then eventually come up. Bass, like they'll do that
Yeah.
for sure, but like you don't have to catch them that way. Like you can just go to the bank and catch bass. So from a popper perspective, like I was doing this back in this would have been like late March, early April. Like in the early part of the shad spawn, like more up in the muddy section of the lake. You could see the shad spawn like going on a little bit. So I was like, okay, there's gonna be bass around here for sure.
Yeah.
Because the shad are up on the banks. So I just tied a white popper on that had a rattle in it that I tie. And you just like you slap the thing on the bank as close as you can to the bank. Like you give it one strip, like one good pop, and they just smoke it. It's
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to say that it's easier. I have a lot of friends who bass fish, like in general, but especially on the lake. And I'll always text them and I'll always say, like, man, like bass fishing is so much easier on this lake than striper fishing is. Like, and I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just probably just an easier fish to catch. They're a little bit less temperamental.
Like as it goes, a bass is much easier to catch.
Yeah.
For sure. Like larger bass, I'm not going to say that because like
Yeah.
large bass, targeting large bass, like there's, you know, specific ways to do it. Catching them is like not very easy for
Mhm.
sure, you know, because everything is targeting them for the most part,
Right.
or everybody is. But like just bass, like blanket bass in general, much easier to target
Yeah.
because there are far more of them, and they're in areas. They're like there's some clues, like there's some spatial clues. Like probably gonna be one over there, and typically there is.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how big it's gonna be, but
There's going to be something over there.
exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
So you can maybe have a little bit more, a lot more options
Hmm.
as far as like good places to key in on
Absolutely.
when you're going out there.
Yeah.
You're looking for that cover. You're looking for structure.
Yeah, my advice if you want like some easier fishing, stay out of the like 15-foot visibility areas, like up around, like Rocky Branch and the Clifties and stuff like that right now, where you can like look over the side of the boat and see rocks down in
Yeah.
20 feet of water. Like those are very difficult scenarios to catch fish in general,
Mhm.
period. Because like, yeah, that fish can see your lure from, 40 feet away, but they can see your 20-foot boat, like,
Yeah.
floating over the top of
Yeah,
it
it's
too.
right there.
So go up in the river, like find some murkier water, like stop on a bank that has some rocks and you can see some trees that have fallen like in the water. There's going to be bait and other small game fish surrounding that area. Like go throw poppers around that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
go throw swim flies
Yeah.
around that stuff.
Yeah. Floating line, or would you go like when you're throwing?
Totally depending on like how deep the water you're fishing. Like if you're throwing a popper, obviously a floating line. But
Yeah.
like if I'm throwing, a game changer type of fly, I'm probably throwing either like a full intermediate or just
Okay.
an intermediate tip. So
Okay.
like the first 20 to 30 feet of the fly line is
Yeah.
going to be like a 1.5 to 2 inch per second. And then all the remainder of the running line is going to be floating.
Okay.
So again, like not a super challenging fly line to cast, like heavier, larger tapers on the front, like easier to turn over those big flies.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And it's like just in general, it's more fun throughout the day because like you're throwing at something. The big thing to remember from like a striper bass topwater bite, like when you're chasing that in the morning, it's not easy
Mm-hmm.
because it's never a guarantee because those fish move so much. And you're not like throwing at something.
Yeah.
You're throwing at a school of fish that is hopefully there, but you're not like throwing at a tree.
Right.
Your bass aren't going to traditionally school around a bush or something like that. You're just throwing like out into the water and hoping for the best.
That is tough because like
It is. Yeah.
mentally, like in like your confidence of throwing at a point, knowing that I'm fishing that, like that's a very strong motivator to keep going. It's like if I can at least put my fly within, a couple feet of that, then I feel confident that something could happen. But yeah, when you're like just kind of ghost casting out there to like hopefully something is there, I could see that being real easy to like lose confidence in.
Well, you lose confidence and then you lose focus like
Mhm.
very quickly.
Yeah.
So like you were saying, when you're throwing at a point or something, you know, you're staying locked in on that, and like you're knowing like at any point like I could get hit here. So you're
Gosh.
swimming your flies correctly, like you're focusing in on what you're doing with your fly, like you're ready for the strike.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why you listen to all that heavy metal because you
Absolutely.
gotta stay locked
Dude,
in.
and I can't even tell you, like I'm listening to music the whole time. Not that stuff typically.
Yeah.
Like that's more reserved for like the indie alternative side. Like I'll
Yeah.
turn on the Shins or Daywave or like the soft rock. But like
You gotta stay locked
you
in.
have to have stuff that keeps you going.
Okay.
That like keeps you focused on it. Because at any time, like the best way that I can explain this, and it's because it's the way that I do it, is like you have to imagine the scenario that is under the water. So
Mhm.
like you can't see it physically with your eye like you can with a bank that may have some rocks coming out from it or something. But it's like, okay, here's what I'm thinking is down there,
Mhm.
like without any electronics. Like this is what the scenario is, I think.
Yeah.
Like this is where my fly is versus, the shad and the fish around there. Like here's what I want that fly to be doing the whole time.
Yeah.
Like you're stripping and you're pausing, and you're like you pause it and you're like, okay, the fish sees it.
Yeah.
Like you're creating this like fantasy
The
world.
scenario.
Basically, yeah.
I could tell even as you were talking about that, like your eyes, like you almost closed your eyes there.
That's it,
You were
man.
like imagining
Yeah.
this world underneath
Like
the water.
you're down, like you throw 80-foot cast or whatever, right? And like you count it down because you're like, all right, like I want to fish 10 feet deep. Like, counting to 20 or
Mhm.
whatever, right? And then now you're just like, you're starting to strip it and you're like, should be a fish over there,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, you pause it for a couple extra seconds and you're like, okay, they saw it.
Mhm.
Like, then you're starting to strip it a little faster, like acting like a shad that
Like, he's now
has,
seen.
has now been seen,
Yeah.
like now swimming faster away. And it's like, and then eventually you get it back to the boat and you're like, all right, like didn't get one on that cast. So
Yeah.
like, let's do it again, you know?
Let's set up the stage,
Right.
the theater of it again.
Exactly.
Oh,
But
man.
that's it. Like, dude, it's maddening.
I'm trying to think what haven't I asked you yet?
Let's see. Well, let's
What
consult the all-knowing sheet from here. Uh oh, specific species to target on a fly rod.
Yeah.
Um Spring is a really fun time because we've been talking about the stripers and the bass and all that stuff. I had a trip earlier in the spring where we were gonna have really high winds and like less than favorable conditions, but this couple was in town and they wanted to go fish, and I was like, hey, like, if you guys are willing to call a little bit of an audible here, like I've got kind of a fun bite going on. The crappie were up on the bank spawning.
Okay.
I was like, I know how to do this from a conventional perspective. Like we can just turn this into a fly deal.
Yeah.
So we essentially nymphed uh like big keeper crappie off the bank all day.
Really?
Yeah. So it was one of those deals where like
How are you rigged up?
they had fly fished quite a bit, so they already knew like how to set the hook and all this stuff, like how to cast well. So it was like you had basically an oversized indicator, like your normal indicator would be very small for the most part for most small midges and nymphs. These obviously being a little bit heavier, like a 1/32 ounce jig head, something like that.
Mhm.
Just a little bit larger to make sure that it stays floating. And then 2 feet below it, like I have some hand tied crappie jigs with like marabou tails and
Okay.
chenille bodies and stuff like that. And I had done it like the week before. I was like, oh, this works.
Yeah.
Like this works really well. Um, so the same type of deal. If you really want to start with something that's very simple,
Yeah.
like that's a fun one to do
Okay.
in the spring when the crappie are like starting to move up on the bank to spawn. It's like you find logs sticking out of the water or trees again that have blown down in the water or logs just like running into the water. It's like throw it over there. It's like it slams the water. You don't have to be quiet with it.
Yeah.
It's all floating lines.
No
And then
presentation.
you just watch the bobber. It's just like nymphing,
Yeah.
like for trout.
Oh.
So that's something fun to do in the springtime.
You could do that probably from the bank too, I would think.
Absolutely.
Right? Or off a dock
you
or something like that.
Totally do it from the bank.
Because that's one of the things is too is like if you don't have a boat, it's tough to fish the lake.
It is for sure. Yeah, I would tell you like stick with a floating line and stick with like poppers and things like that.
Okay.
Like floating flies that aren't going to get hung very often or like truly weedless flies.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sinking lines from a bank are just going to get you in trouble.
You're gonna be in so much trouble.
Yeah, you're going to be hung.
What's behind you too,
Right.
on most of the banks on Beaver, like
Yeah.
it's not a super open area.
What I can tell you though is like if you can find certain areas that, you can get around a buckbrush flooded bank or something and you can wade out
Mm-hmm.
basically to the edge of that buckbrush, you can give those fish a new, I guess, perspective on a bait that they have probably never had before.
Mm.
So you think about, 99% of your anglers out there are fishing, out from the bank, 50, 60 feet out from the bank. They're either pitching into the bank or like throwing up past into the bushes and
Mm.
bringing it out.
Yeah.
And then from your perspective on the bank, it gives you something new because you can either throw out and bring it back in where those fish will be hiding in and they're again seeing it from a new perspective. They want
Yeah.
to eat it just because it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Or like as you just get past the edge of the buckbrush, throwing down like both directions parallel with the bank.
Right.
With a popper or with a swim fly, something like that. Those big fish specifically, like big largemouth,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times they're just looking for a new way that lure is moving
Mhm.
alongside.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing the same lures pretty
Right.
much day in and day out, or same type of lures.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you can just present it in a new way,
Yeah.
that's all the change they need. sometimes.
they'll freak out and be like,
Absolutely.
I need that.
Yeah.
I need that in my life.
Yeah. So the bank thing is like I know a couple incredible bank anglers that are throwing like big swim baits and things like that. That I mean, they just crush fish
Yeah.
from the bank
Oh man.
because it's something new. It's a new presentation.
Yeah. That's good to hear as a guy who doesn't own a boat.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the last one for the spring. Well, there's so many things out there. Like the catfish are spawning this time of the year. I've caught more catfish this year fly fishing than I can even count because they're hanging around along with those shad as well.
Yeah.
That's not one that I would even tell you like you really target that hard. Like you're just fishing along the bank, specifically around lay down logs and things, and like you just catch one.
It's just
catch
like
a big flathead or something.
bycatch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Man.
And then the walleye thing, like the walleye, really like mid-May to mid-June, when they're, like either spawning or post-spawn,
Mm-hmm.
they'll sit up closer again to that buckbrush or like more on like a shallow hump and things like that around those same schools of bait fish.
Okay.
And like when you're catching spotted bass and largemouth bass and small stripers, you'll just hook a walleye once in a while, because they're all mixed in there kind of together.
Right.
So spring is a really fun time.
Yeah.
Like I went the other day and I caught 2 species of bass, a striper, and a walleye, like all in about 4 hours. I didn't catch a lot of fish,
Yeah.
but
Got a good variety.
Yeah. So it's cool. It adds some flavor into what can typically be a little boring with just like a bass driven game.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense, man.
Mm-hmm.
That is cool. The variety of it is fun because you kind of never know what you're going to get.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like the key is, in really all of the scenarios you laid out, is like if you can find the bait, like the shad.
That's it.
Like
if I can give you any tip at all, like if you're wanting to go learn the lake, like go find the bait.
Yeah.
Go find the threadfin shad and the gizzard shad or whatever. Like go find that. Because if you can get around it, like not every school of bait is going to have fish around it, but you're eventually going to find one that has a whole bunch of them around it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then you're just matching that shad as close as you can.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. And what I would tell you is like, if you can't figure out exactly what size they are, like tie on a slightly larger fly,
Mm-hmm.
try to sink it down right into the middle where you think that bait ball is, and like just strip it as hard as you can right through the middle of it. Because you'll do 2 things with that. You'll mess up the school shad and kind of disperse them.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get that feed activated again with the predatory fish around. But you'll 9 times out of 10 probably hook a shad with your fly as well. And that'll tell you exactly like length, color, like general size, like even how they swim.
Yeah.
Really, because you throw them back in the water and you can see them kind of swim away.
Yeah.
So that'll give you a really good idea as far as that's a big one.
That's a good tip.
I can't tell you how many like crusty shad I've brought home on my boat deck and then like brought into the tying room and you just kind of like set it there and you're like, okay,
like, I'm gonna tie this as best
is
I can.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another fun thing. Like as a fly tire, that's why I like the lake so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, well, this is close to this, but it's like it's not exactly it, or you tie it slightly different, and like it moves in an entirely different way.
Yeah.
And then you take it out and crush fish on it. You're like, this is it.
Yeah.
Like this is the one.
I've done it.
Right. Until you haven't done it. And then you're like, okay, let's tie something else.
Back to the drawing board.
Right.
That is cool, man. I do like that, being able to like pull something out and then try to like tie it and replicate it as best you can.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what you're doing.
That's the whole deal. Like that's what can set us, like on the fly fishing side, that's what sets us apart from the conventional side. Like, the conventional guys can, you can like paint lures and like tie jigs and things like that. Or, like they can even pour their own molds for soft plastics and stuff. But like, we're like at the end of the day, like we're putting chicken feathers on a hook and trying to get fish to eat that. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's insane in itself.
Yeah.
So it's really cool and it works.
It is, man. It is. Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming on again.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Opening up the book, dude.
Yep.
You're always super generous with your knowledge, and
I'm glad I just got to rant for a little while.
Isn't it fun?
I feel like I talked about nothing.
You just you end up just talking about like your favorite things for an hour, and you're like, cool, we're done.
Yeah,
we did it.
Yeah.
It's a good time, man.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you. It's good to see you again. Glad things are going well. The guide service is taking off.
Yeah.
And guys, if you're listening and you want to go do this, here's the guy. Go book a day with them and Hit the water.
Yeah, I do the guide trips, and I've also got the casting lessons as well.
Okay.
If anybody out there is looking for just fly casting lessons,
Yeah.
for that one.